Indiana won. Let's get that out of the way right now. 85-75. Another victory in the record column, another number that looks perfectly fine when you scroll past it on your phone. But if you actually watched this game, if you sat through all 40 minutes of what the Indiana Fever deployed against the Connecticut Sun, you already know that the scoreboard is the least interesting thing about what happened. Because buried underneath that 10-point margin is a story that one win cannot clean up, cannot explain away, and cannot silence. A story about a coaching decision that keeps coming back, a system that keeps returning, and a player who keeps outperforming it anyway, which somehow makes the whole thing even more uncomfortable to watch. This is that conversation, and we are going to have it completely honestly. Let's start with the motion offense, because everything in this game, every number, every frustration, every commercial and competitive concern flows directly from it. Stephanie White deployed the motion offense again against Connecticut. And before anyone frames this as some casual stylistic preference or a minor tactical wrinkle, let's be very clear about what the motion offense actually is and what it actually does to Caitlin Clark's role within this Indiana attack. The motion offense is a passing-heavy, rotation-dependent system. The ball moves, players cycle through positions, passes happen in sequence, often through multiple hands before a shot opportunity emerges. That description sounds neutral enough, but here's where it stops being neutral. The shot opportunities that the motion offense consistently produces at the end of those passing chains are not randomly distributed across the roster. They accumulate in a very specific direction. They pile up for Kelsey Mitchell. And the evidence that supports that observation isn't coming from any particular bias or agenda. It's coming from the box score of this specific game and from the pattern that has repeated itself across this entire season, every single time this system gets deployed. Clark, in the motion offense, is not the primary initiating force of Indiana's attack. She is not the player the system is built around. She is not the creative engine whose decision-making drives the offense from a position of authority. She is a piece within the system, a component, a player who operates within the designed flow rather than one who determines it. That is what the motion offense does to the most talented offensive player on this roster, potentially one of the most gifted offensive players in the history of this league. It turns her into a piece within someone else's organizational framework instead of the centerpiece of an attack built specifically around what she does better than almost anyone who has ever played this game. And the player the system routes possessions toward, the player whose opportunities emerge most consistently from the designed flow of this action, is Kelsey Mitchell. That is not speculation. That is what the box score shows. That is what the box score reflects. And in this game against Connecticut, the numbers that Mitchell produced within that designed opportunity structure told a very specific and very revealing story. Kelsey Mitchell shot 2 of 9 from three-point range in this game. 2 of 9. That is a 22% conversion rate from the perimeter for a player receiving significant designed offensive opportunity through a system specifically organized to create her looks. She finished with 19 points, and here's the part that matters. Not because she was efficient. She finished with 19 points because the volume of possessions the system routed to her was high enough that even converting at 22% from 3 accumulated into a double-digit point total. That is volume scoring in its least flattering form. That is a player accumulating numbers through the sheer quantity of opportunities the system generates for her, rather than through any precision or efficiency in converting those opportunities. Now hold that in your mind and place it directly next to what Caitlin Clark did in the same game, operating within the same motion offense framework that was not designed to maximize her output, was not routing possessions through her as the primary creative option, and was not built around her decision-making as the central organizing principle of Indiana's attack. Caitlin shot 5 of 10 from 3, 50%, in a game where the system was actively not designed to create her perimeter looks, in a game where possessions were being routed through other players by design. She finished with 25 points on 10 of 17 from the field overall, 5 assists, 3 rebounds, and a plus-minus of plus 15 in 36 minutes. Read those two shooting lines side by side one more time because they are the most important numbers this game produced. Mitchell, 2 of 9 from 3, 19 points in a system built to generate her opportunities. Clark, 5 of 10 from 3, 25 points in a system that was not built to generate hers. The efficiency gap between those two lines in a system that appears designed to prioritize one player over the other is not a subtle analytical observation. It is a flashing sign sitting directly in the middle of the box score, asking a question that demands an honest answer. If the motion offense is producing 22% three-point shooting from the player it is designed to serve and 50% three-point shooting from the player it is not designed to serve, what exactly is the competitive justification for continuing to run it? Here is the number from this game that should be generating the most conversation and somehow generates the least: plus 15. Caitlin Clark's plus 15 in 36 minutes against Connecticut was plus 15. For anyone who needs a translation, plus 15 measures the point differential when a specific player is on the floor. A plus 15 means that when Clark was on the court, Indiana outscored Connecticut by 15 points. That is not a marginal edge. That is not a slight competitive advantage. That is a 15-point swing in a game that ended with a 10-point final margin, which means, mathematically, that Indiana's margin of victory is entirely attributable to the competitive impact Clark produces when she is on the floor. And here is the part that makes that number genuinely extraordinary rather than just good. That plus 15 was produced within the motion offensive system, the system that routes possessions around her, the system that does not build the attack around her decision-making, the system that was not designed to maximize her output. Within those constraints, within a framework that is analytically identifiable as suboptimal for her specific skill set, she still generated a 15-point differential impact on this game. The competitive question that raises is not complicated. What does that number look like in a system that is actually built for her? What does that impact number become when the possessions that are currently being routed through other players by design are instead placed in her hands and she is allowed to operate as the primary creative force from a position of genuine authority? The gap between plus 15 in a constrained system and whatever number emerges from an optimized one is the gap between what Indiana currently is and what the documented evidence of the season has consistently shown it could be. Monique Billings deserves recognition here because her individual performance in this game was genuinely strong, and it would be analytically incomplete to discuss the plus-minus numbers without acknowledging hers. 10 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 60% from the field, 4 for 4 from the free throw line, 27 minutes, plus 18. That is an outstanding individual impact measurement. Against Connecticut specifically, that level of interior efficiency is exactly the kind of front court contribution Indiana has needed throughout this season, and Billings delivered it in this game in a way that was a real and meaningful contributor to the comfortable final margin. Her production was legitimate, her impact was measurable, and it deserves to be stated clearly in any honest accounting of what this game produced. But a plus 18 from Billings in 27 minutes and a plus 15 from Clark in 36 minutes, both produced within a motion offensive framework, should be generating serious analytical questions about what those impact numbers suggest about the ceiling this team is currently operating below.
This is the part of the story that elevates everything else from analytical concern to something that genuinely requires explanation, because this is not happening in isolation. This is not the first data point in a short sample. This is a decision that was made with full access to a specific and historically significant piece of evidence that made the alternative path unmistakably clear. 2 games ago, Clark-Aliyah Boston ran the 2-woman pick-and-roll action as the primary offensive framework. What happened in that game is not subject to interpretation or analytical debate. Clark and Boston produced the first 30-point double-double partnership in the history of the WNBA. That is a verified historical achievement. That is a combination that went into the record books as something that had never happened before in this league. The analytical community was not divided about what that result meant. Everyone watching, everyone analyzing, everyone with access to the efficiency numbers was unified in identifying the Clark-Boston 2-woman action as the most efficient, most dangerous, and most defensively difficult offensive option this Indiana team possesses. The evidence was not ambiguous. The evidence was comprehensive. The evidence was historic. And in the very next game, the game against Connecticut that we are discussing right now, the motion offense was the primary organizational framework.
Let that sequence be examined with full honesty, because it is the most analytically significant sequence in Indiana's season. The coaching staff watched the Clark-Boston 2-woman action produce something that had never happened in WNBA history. They had complete, direct, undeniable access to the evidence that this specific action represents Indiana's highest efficiency offensive option. They saw the historic result. They understood what it meant. And then, in the very next game, they returned to the motion offense. The question that raises is not subtle, and it is not unfair. What is the coaching rationale for walking away from an offensive action that just made league history in favor of a system that the same game's evidence had already identified as less efficient? What is the analytical justification for that specific sequencing? What competitive logic supports the decision to observe a historically significant result from one offensive approach and then immediately return to the alternative approach in the next game? The evidence of this entire season points consistently toward one answer to those questions, and that answer is uncomfortable. The motion offense is not the primary offensive system because it produces the best competitive results for Indiana. The analytics don't support that. The efficiency numbers don't support it. The shooting percentages don't support it. The plus-minus data doesn't support it, and the historic result from 2 games ago certainly doesn't support it. The motion offense keeps returning as the primary system for reasons that appear to have more to do with organizational offensive priorities around Kelsey Mitchell than with any competitive rationale that the evidence of this season can actually validate. That is a pointed claim, but the box score, the shot distribution, and the sequencing of decisions across this season are what point toward it. The 10-point victory looks clean. It is not clean. Beneath the final margin are structural problems that this team has been carrying throughout this season, and that this specific game against Connecticut made visible again in ways that deserve direct acknowledgement. Indiana turned the ball over 19 times in this game. Connecticut turned it over 9. That is a 10-turnover deficit in the possession battle, a competitive advantage in Connecticut's favor on the dimension of the game that most directly determines which team gets more opportunities to score. A 10-possession advantage for the opposing team is not a minor fluctuation. It is a structural gap that Indiana was required to overcome through superior shooting efficiency rather than through any competitive discipline in protecting possessions. Think about what that means in practical terms. Indiana won this game by 10 points, while simultaneously gifting Connecticut 10 extra possessions through turnovers.
The shooting efficiency that Clark, Billings, and others produced had to compensate not just for Connecticut's offense, but for the 10 additional Connecticut offensive opportunities that Indiana's own turnover problems created. A team with Indiana's talent level should not be losing the possession battle by 10 against Connecticut. That is not a ceiling problem. That is a preparation and execution accountability problem that belongs in the complete accounting of this game's competitive reality. The defensive rebounding situation adds another layer to that accounting. Indiana surrendered 26 offensive rebounds to Connecticut in this game. 26. Offensive rebounds are extended possession opportunities, second and third chance opportunities that defensive failures allow opponents to generate. Giving up 26 offensive boards is not a rounding error or a one-possession anomaly. It is a structural vulnerability that directly affects competitive outcomes in games where the margin is tighter and the opponent's offensive execution is more dangerous than Connecticut's was in this specific game. Against a better opponent, against a team in the postseason, against a team that converts those second chance opportunities at a higher rate, 26 offensive boards surrendered is a number that turns a comfortable victory into a competitive crisis. The defensive rebounding total is a recurring positioning and boxing out failure that the coaching staff has not resolved through scheme or individual accountability across the season. It showed up again here, and it will show up again in the games where it matters more.
Sophie Cunningham's return from the questionable elbow designation is worth noting in this context. She came back and contributed 11 points for Indiana. The production itself was a positive competitive contribution. Cunningham returning, getting 11 points, adding to the offensive depth is straightforwardly good for Indiana's competitive picture. The speed and timing of her return, relative to the Instagram situation that preceded the designation, has generated observations in the analytical community about what that timing context might reflect. Those observations are part of the documented record. What they ultimately mean is something observers continue to evaluate as new information emerges. The officiating dimension generated pointed commentary from multiple people watching this game. The pattern of contact around Clark being handled with lower whistle sensitivity than comparable contact situations elsewhere on the floor is a documented season-long concern. Indiana shot 13 free throws as a team. Connecticut shot 19. The specific individual assignments within those totals require complete film examination to assess with analytical precision, but the overall picture that those numbers paint sits within the broader pattern that has been observed and documented across this entire season, and the full film review of this game will either confirm it or complicate it. The motion offense is boring. That is not a casual fan complaint. That is not an aesthetic preference that can be dismissed as subjective. It is a commercially significant observation that the attendance figures, the viewership data, and the secondary market ticket pricing have been quantifying throughout this season in ways that connect directly to Indiana's value as a sports entertainment product. Watch the motion offense in real time and then honestly describe what you are seeing. Passes move from player to player. The ball rotates through multiple hands. Players cycle through positions. Shot opportunities emerge at the end of passing chains that have drained whatever spontaneous energy might have existed at the start of the possession. The motion offense is methodical, deliberate, and about as dynamically entertaining as watching someone carefully parallel park. It does not create moments. It does not generate the kind of individual creative expression that stops you from checking your phone. It does not produce the plays that get clipped and shared and talked about the next morning. Caitlin Clark, operating as the primary creative force of a basketball offense, produces all of those things. Clark running pick and roll with Boston, making decisions from the top of the key, shooting off the dribble from the perimeter, threading passes into spaces that other players don't see, operating with the authority of a player whose talent demands and rewards the freedom to make choices.
That is the product that filled arenas, drove national broadcast viewership numbers to historic levels for this league, and created a secondary ticket market where Indiana games were pricing at multiples of face value. The motion offense that routes possessions through other players and converts Clark from a creative force into a component within someone else's scheme is not that product. It is a fundamentally different entertainment experience, and the audience has been honest about the difference. The declining attendance figures, the arenas with visible empty sections, the viewership trend data, these are the market's honest assessment of what it is being offered versus what it came to see. This matters beyond the question of wins and losses. Indiana's commercial value, the franchise's standing as a nationally significant sports entertainment property, the league's ability to leverage the platform that Clark's arrival created, is inseparable from what Clark generates when she operates with full creative authority. The motion offense is not compatible with that product, and the commercial consequences of deploying it as the primary system are not hypothetical concerns. They are already showing up in the data that measures how many people are choosing to show up and tune in. Indiana won this game. That fact is permanent, and it matters. Victories accumulate in the standings, they maintain competitive positioning, and they keep the postseason picture manageable. But winning this specific game against this specific opponent by this specific margin in this specific way does not answer the question that the full arc of this season has been building toward with increasing clarity. What is this Indiana Fever team actually capable of being?
The evidence that exists to answer that question is not speculative. It is documented, verifiable, and in certain cases, literally historic. Clark producing plus 15 in a constrained system tells you what she is doing with one hand tied behind her back. The first 30-point double-double partnership in WNBA history from 2 games ago tells you what the ceiling looks like when the right action gets the deployment it deserves. The shooting efficiency gap between Clark at 50% from 3 and the player the system is designed to serve at 22% from 3 tells you where the possessions should be going if competitive results are the primary organizing principle. None of that evidence points toward the motion offense as the answer. All of it points toward Clark, operating with primary creative authority, with the ball in her hands, with the offense built around her decision-making rather than organized to route possessions through other players, as the path to whatever ceiling this team's talent actually allows it to reach. The motion offense produces a team that wins the games it should win, while never becoming the team its best player makes it capable of being. That is the precise analytical portrait of what Indiana currently is, a team that wins enough, competes adequately, stays in the postseason conversation, and simultaneously operates consistently below the ceiling that its most important player has demonstrated is reachable when the coaching decisions actually reflect the analytical evidence. Clark's 25 points and plus 15 in this game are the product of extraordinary individual talent overcoming systemic constraints. That sentence contains 2 different pieces of information, and both of them matter. The extraordinary individual talent part means Indiana keeps winning games it should win. The overcoming systemic constraints part means the margin between what Indiana is and what it could be never closes, never shrinks, and never gets seriously examined in the context of the decisions that produce it. The Connecticut Sun are not the measuring stick. A 10-point victory over Connecticut with 19 turnovers and the motion offense deployed in place of the Clark-Boston action that just made league history is not a statement about what Indiana is capable of in the games that actually determine legacies. It is a result of individual excellence papering over organizational inefficiency against an opponent that the talent level should handle. The postseason is where those organizational inefficiencies stop being compensatable by individual excellence alone.
The postseason is where the gap between what Indiana currently is and what the evidence shows it could be becomes the difference between deep runs and early exits. The postseason is where the motion offense, with its 22% three-point shooting from the player it's designed to serve, and its possession distribution that routes looks away from the player shooting 50%, meets opponents whose talent level is high enough to make that inefficiency cost something that a 10-point final margin can no longer conceal. Here is where everything in this game, this season, and this coaching conversation lands when you put it all together honestly. Clark is producing MVP caliber output in a system not designed to maximize what she does. The team wins when her individual excellence is sufficient to compensate for the organizational approach that surrounds her. The offensive system consistently returns to the framework that prioritizes other players' designed opportunities over the analytically verified conclusion that putting the ball in Clark's hands and building the attack around her decision-making produces this team's best competitive results. And the gap between what Indiana is right now and what the documented evidence of this season has consistently shown it could be remains the single most important and persistently unaddressed gap in women's professional basketball. The win is in the record, 85-75, Indiana Fever over Connecticut Sun. That number is real, it counts, and it belongs to this team. But alongside it in the record is the motion offense, the 19 turnovers, the 26 offensive rebounds surrendered, the 2 of 9 from 3 from the player the system is designed to serve, the 5 of 10 from 3 from the player the system is not designed to serve, the plus 15, the historic 2-game-ago result from the action that was immediately set aside. All of those numbers are in the record too, and the story they tell together, the story this entire season has been building across every game and every competitive measurement available, is a story about a team that keeps winning while simultaneously refusing to become what its best player makes genuinely reachable. Clark is doing what generational talents do. She is making the team around her work, making the system she's been given function, and producing historic individual output in spite of the constraints the organizational decisions place on her. That is what you are watching when you watch Caitlin Clark play basketball for the Indiana Fever in 2025. You are watching greatness operating below its own ceiling because the decisions being made around it have not reflected the analytical reality that the evidence of this entire season has documented with increasing clarity and increasing urgency. The win is there. The potential is visible. The gap between the two is the most important conversation women's basketball is having right now, and it lives directly inside the box score of a game that Indiana won by 10.